Howdy folks. Okay, so we are in Queenstown, New Zealand, November Zulu, Quebec November Airport in the G36, and I have just cranked the aeroplane up. So I want to just give you a quick explanation on how we use lights in a light aircraft. In fact, this really applies to pretty much all aircraft. The bigger the aircraft, sort of the more professional the operator, so it tends to be based on company standard operating procedures, or SOPs, as to precisely when and how and why different lights are used. But here's the basic methodology. So the G36 is a good example because we've got pretty much all the types of lights you can get, certainly most of them. So nav lights we would generally use when it's going to be low light conditions, okay, because they're going to increase the visibility of the aircraft. Okay, so we'll jump outside. There's always a red one on the left, like so, and a green one on the right. Okay, so boats have those, and obviously aircraft do as well. So the next light that we have is the beacon. This sometimes is called an anti-collision light, and it can be white or red. Most of the time it is red, and this one here is what we turn on when the engine is going to be running, basically. So you'll see these turned on an aircraft when it's about to start up, when the engine's running, and when the engine's shut down, the beacon is turned off. And this is actually for an airliner. When an airliner pulls up to the gate at the terminal, this is what the ground handling personnel are looking for. And it's not always the case, to be honest. If crew are a bit complacent, then they may just approach the aircraft with the beacon still on. Sometimes a crew forgets to turn it off during their shutdown flow, but the way it's supposed to work is that as long as the beacon is on, then that indicates to the anyone on the ground external to the aircraft that the aircraft is in an unsafe configuration, about to start, or the engine is running. And then once the beacon is turned off, then it's safe to approach the aircraft. So in terms of an airline environment, that's when they can approach with the ladder, the baggage carts, ground power units and things like that. Okay, so that's in the absence of any direct cockpit to ground communications via a headset, which gets plugged into somewhere near the nose of the aircraft normally. Okay, so we can see our little flashing beacon up here on the top of the tail. Alright, so the next light that we have is the strobe light. Now, some of the aircraft in the sim don't have a beacon, they just have strobe lights. Now, the strobe lights are pretty much what they say. They're the disco lights that flash on the wingtips and sometimes on the very back of the tail as well. And so these are quite a bright flash. I mean, it's a strobe. If you look at it, it's quite irritating on the eyes. So we can see that quite a big flash that comes off those. And so that's pretty distracting to any ground personnel, other aircraft, or people who might be operating in the airport environment. So for this reason, we don't use strobe lights on the ramp. So they only get turned on once you line up on the runway or into the runway, and then you turn them back off again when you exit the runway. These are also often turned on if you're crossing a runway. So if you're taxiing to one runway and on the way there you have to cross a runway, or coming back after landing, it's the same, then you'll put the strobe lights on when you cross that runway, and that's just to highlight the aircraft so there's as much visibility of the aircraft as possible. So if anybody did happen to be taking off and landing and there was a miscommunication from ATC, misunderstanding, or it's an uncontrolled airport, then you're doing as much as you can to make sure you're highly visible to anyone else who may potentially be a conflict to you. Okay, so that's why we only turn the strobes on when we enter the runway, basically because it's just a bit of a hazard and it's annoying to other people. Next we have the taxi and landing lights. Now these are pretty self-explanatory, but they also serve a couple of other functions, particularly from an SOP point of view with airlines. So taxi light gets turned on when the aircraft is about to taxi. So again, when you've got, say, a guy like this who's your FBO guy or ground handling personnel, when the taxi light goes on, that means the aircraft is about to start moving. So when the guys get the engine running, they call ATC, Alpha Bravo Charlie, request taxi. Alpha Bravo Charlie, roger, taxi via Alpha Bravo runway 01, or runway 1 in the US. Then you would acknowledge that and then turn the taxi light on. Okay, so you don't turn the taxi light on until the taxi clearance has been received. And of course, at a non-controlled airport, then you'll turn it on when you are about to taxi. So after you've started the engine, particularly in an aeroplane like with a G1000, which so you don't have ground power, you want to get this thing fired up so you can get the alternators on. because otherwise if you're just on the batteries, then you're going to drain the battery pretty quick with these pretty power intensive screens. So you want to get the engine started, get the avionics master on, and then you'll spend 10 minutes or so aligning the AHRS, which is the Attitude Horizon Reference System, and then you will want to program your flight plan and get everything squared away there. So that's going to take a bit of time. If you're sitting there the whole time with your taxi light on, then if somebody is potentially another aircraft wants to cross in front of you, or there's a fuel truck that wants to drive past, or personnel walking around the airport that want to go past, and they see you sitting there with your taxi light on, they assume that you're about to start moving. So if you were sitting there with your taxi light on, fiddling around with your knobs and your screens in the cockpit, not aware of what's happening in the environment around you, you could be holding up a lot of other people in traffic and generally just being a nuisance. So the taxi light tells people that you are going to start taxiing, and of course it illuminates the ground in low light conditions so you can see where you're going when you are taxiing. So that's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, the next one of course is the landing light, and this is basically just going to be a brighter version. I'll just turn the taxi light off so we can get a better idea about that. Okay, so on this aeroplane you can see the taxi light is on the landing gear, and the landing light is just under the spinner there, just on the front of the cowling. Now the landing light, aside from the obvious purpose of illuminating the ground in the runway so you can see it for flare and for takeoff, it also is something we can use to let the control tower know that we have received the takeoff clearance or landing clearance. Okay, so the guys, here's the control tower over here. When they see an aircraft lined up on the runway, as soon as they issue your takeoff clearance, Alpha Bravo Charlie, clear for takeoff, Alpha Bravo Charlie, bang, you flick your landing light on, they know that you have received your takeoff clearance and that you're about to start rolling. If they see an aircraft on the runway with the landing light on before issuing the takeoff clearance, they might call you and say, confirm takeoff clearance, confirm hold position. They're never going to use the words takeoff except in the takeoff clearance, just to avoid any confusion. They're not going to say confirm you are not cleared for takeoff, because that could be confused if someone talks over you, or there's some kind of sort of squelch issue or misunderstanding. It may be confusing. You may think you've been cleared for takeoff when you're not. So they're never going to say that. They're only going to say hold position and confirm holding position, something like that, just to verify that you are not about to take off. But anyway, this is not like an international sort of thing every pilot knows, but it is SOP based. So typically air traffic control guys are going to be aware that airliners typically turn their landing lights on after the takeoff clearance is received, as that final sort of line-up check. Clearance received, lights on, we're good to go. Okay, so it's a good habit to get into, that you only turn the landing light on when you are about to roll it for takeoff. Now, something that's fairly obvious as well, because this taxi light is on the nose wheel, once we get airborne, as soon as that nose wheel retracts, the doors are going to close, the taxi light's not doing anything anymore, right? So we can turn that off. We don't want the taxi light burning away, sitting in a retracted position. There's often a micro switch associated with those sorts of lights, so that as it retracts it automatically turns off, because obviously it can't be used. Not always the case though. These are typically a halogen bulb, so they get very hot, just like a light bulb in your house, and they're quite a high wattage. So that's pretty hot if you've got these gear doors closed in front of it, and that's burning away at quite a high heat. Then you can actually get some heat damage on the inside of the gear doors. So it's a good idea to turn that taxi light off as soon as you retract the gear, irrespective of whether it is an automatic switch or not. Of course, this is going to depend on the type and whatever you're taught in your type rating ground school, or by an instructor who's certifying you in the aircraft. It's something to keep in mind about how we use taxi lights. Obviously the landing light is not retractable, so you can use this when you're airborne to announce your presence to other aircraft that may be around, because that bright shining light is going to make you more visible. But again, once you get above say 10,000 feet or outside of a busy traffic environment, if you're VFR, just go ahead and flick that off, because they have a life, and the longer it's on, the sooner it is, or the more likely it is the thing's going to burn out and then you won't have it. And for night flying, you need to have all of these lights. If you don't have a landing light or nav lights or a beacon, maybe strobe, then you're not able to go night flying. So you want to sort of protect that and just use it when it's most relevant. If you're flying in a place where there's no other traffic around, there's not really, look at these cars going crazy here, there's not much point in they're just driving around in circles, I think they are, then there's not much point in having it on. So that's the lights there, landing lights. Obviously the rest of them, we've just got our floodlight, which is just an overhead light. In fact, this one's a light bar under the glare shield, but some aircraft, they'll have a little light up here. In fact, those are speakers, I think, but there's probably one in the cabin. Is that? Yeah, okay. And so that's that, and obviously panel lights. Now, panel lights are kind of like a master switch to turn the lights on, and once you've got them on, you've got these dim switches here, so you can adjust certain lighting. So you can see that's just this backlighting for the switch panel there. There's one for standby instruments as well. This is just a rear stat, which just modifies the resistance to change the level of brightness there. We can turn down the G1000 stuff as well, and that probably works independent of the panel light switch. Yes, it does. Okay, so let's have a look. Maybe the others just work as well. Yeah, okay, let's see what's on. Floodlights. Floodlight, let's see if that gets turned down. Oh, cool. Alright, awesome. So that's nicely modelled. Okay, so that's about it really for lights.